All right. So thanks for joining me today,
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Nass. Nasi Wheezy.
Nassy Wheezy, lemon squeezy.
Oh shit, he's been practicing. So obviously, like a lot of the folks from Rebels are definitely going to know who you are. A lot of people in the space know who you are for sure, but it's a big space. So I imagine there's going to be some folks here who maybe haven't heard of you before, don't know your past a little bit. So if you want to just give us like a quick bio on kind of what you've been up to in tech and in Web3.
Yeah, that sounds great. So first and foremost, thank you so much for having me. Really a pleasure, and I've been waiting for this conversation for a while. So yeah, my name is Nassim Medekiwak. I'm a blockchain infrastructure and security expert in Web3. We can talk a little bit more about it, though it's very not confidential, but it's like a lot of the things that I'm working on currently are in full stealth mode. But yeah, so started my own thing recently. Prior to that, I was chief information security officer at Andreessen Horowitz Crypto, one of the major VC firm in the space, but also outside of crypto. Just working with amazingly talented people within the firm, but also outside of the firm. The entire portfolio that Andreessen Horowitz invests in. I think that names like OpenSea and Yuga Labs and Uniswap and Layer Zero. So many amazing companies building tomorrow's infrastructure and experiences, essentially tomorrow's brands. And I just got the pleasure essentially to work with leaders among all of those companies to really bring a Web3 that we can be proud of, essentially, and that will scale, that would be secure, and that will have the right flexibility for the future use cases that we keep discovering and implementing, right? So that's what I spent a year and a half on recently. And prior to that, I was working on the Libra project at Facebook. So I was relatively early on the wallet side, right? There were like two parts to the Libra project. There was the Libra slash DM blockchain. And there was the Calibra, then kind of renamed to Novi wallet. And so really joined early the wallet kind of adventure with my friend Riaz, who was also CTO alongside me at Andreessen Horowitz, and whom I've spent 7 years working very closely with. And so at Facebook, I was mainly responsible for building security infrastructure for the wallet, essentially the key management solution that actually would keep all the keys, of all the assets that Facebook holds secure. I'm very excited for, ended up not launching because of regulatory, I would call it thunder, and oversight, which, we need, but sometimes it may go very far, to the point where even while building all the, kind of technical requirements essentially to launch, it is sometimes not sufficient. So it is pretty much what happened, but got like a great deal of great infrastructure there built, and this is actually going to be reused for things that we're going to see very soon, as part of Instagram. So I'm actually extremely excited about that. That certainly my code will live on and actually will be used for great experiences used by hopefully billions of people. Prior to that, I was essentially, an early engineer at Anchorage. Anchorage, for those who don't know, is one of the main crypto custodian in the space. Essentially, what they do is they're a crypto bank that serves other institutions. Think VCs, hedge funds, insurance funds, and pension funds, and all types of other banks, all types of institutions, essentially, that have an extremely high bar when it comes to security and compliance, right? So I joined pretty early there. I think I was like employee number 10, and engineer number 6. and essentially worked that same thing, kind of building the security backbone and the key management piece there. So very excited that is Anchorage ended up being the first OCC approved federal crypto bank. So they're actually a federal bank that does hold crypto for institutional folks, and I couldn't be happier to have participated in this journey. Prior to that, I was actually working with the soon to be Anchorage founders at Docker on all things infrastructure and security, more kind of like general cloud infrastructure. But yeah, just as you can see, kind of like very deep on the infrastructure and security side. A lot of key management, a lot of highly critical software being built, and I spent some time also at Apple in the security team on similar problems, and a little bit of a competitive security scene as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So a lot of security, obviously in there. I'm curious about what drew you specifically to that side of the space, or like, what did you have an early experience with a bad security experience or something? Like, it seems like you're very drawn to the security side, and there must be something that got you there.
Yeah, so I'm actually just I love competition. I live for competition, and so the thing that was actually very interesting about security is that it takes two of my kind of very natural ways of thinking. The first one is I'm competing with someone else. So whether you're the bad guy, you're competing with the person building, ramparts and kind of like defenses. But if you're on the builder side, similarly, you're trying to build and kind of like anticipate the next move of the bad guys, right? You're trying to see what are your weaknesses ahead of the people against you. And so I really love this part of security, just constantly, you cannot rest essentially because someone else has like an incentive essentially to hack you and just take advantage of your systems. And the other part that is also very interesting is that in security, it is absolutely critical to strive for the absolute kind of like, so perfection doesn't exist, but like you need to understand exactly what is the absolute best structure and kind of architecture for a component if you want to make it well. And so I do think that oftentimes when you're thinking about software engineering and people building, anything, right? Like front end on just like a web application or like some infrastructure, blockchain, at the end of the day, you oftentimes want to focus on features, whereas the incentive for security people is to truly understand the perfect kind of like how the machine should work perfectly, and then from there, you try to build it, add additional, kind of like defenses in depth at every single layer of the product, and I always love this.
It's awesome. So it's almost kind of gamified in your mind, right? So that makes
100%.
hours of coding definitely a lot more fun when you're thinking about it in that way, right? And
Yeah.
I'm a musician, right? So I studied music in school, and I really appreciate music of people like Bach, where it is a perfect puzzle, and if one piece is in the wrong place, it all falls apart. And you go back and find out where that piece is and why it works that way, and is there a way to make it work differently or not? And sometimes there's not, right? And it's so I totally get that, and that's a great way. I definitely 100% understand why that'd be like an attractive side of the space for you now. So that's awesome. I always wondered because like you go deep on it. I see your posts, on Twitter sometimes, and like you go in depth on this stuff, and I'm like, this is crazy. Like he's spending his free time now like looking into this as well, and even it gets interested when there's a big hack or something like that. My knowledge is limited like greatly in comparison to yours, but even just going back through like Etherscan and trying to see like what happened and what got approved and where did something go wrong, and like just seeing like where are these little like holes that people are still finding in what seems to be very secure systems, right? That's just one example, but obviously there's a lot of systems, and that's awesome. So thanks for that. It's like a super in-depth bio on a lot of what you're doing and what you've done, and the wallet stuff is really interesting. And I think like for Instagram, it's a no brainer, right? Like they are a kind of photo experience app, or at least that's what they're sold to. I mean, they're an advertising platform. Let's get real, but the wallet side, adding NFTs, stuff like that, which they're getting super interested in, and we're seeing more and more about it. It makes sense that integrating wallet was kind of the next step. So it's great to see that probably long hours of coding and sleepless nights are still going to get used, and you're going to see a feature, or you're going to see something working and going, I made that work. That works because of me.
Exactly.
So that's a good feeling for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the Nuvi part was actually pretty crazy. It was like, we were essentially ready to launch like I don't know, 5 to 7 times. It was actually, like we were ready, and then it was just like, no, you have to add this other thing. We add it. We're ready. This is kind of like this like multiple thing. But it is what it takes essentially to build a space, and it's fine. Some of the things that we build are just not going to launch. They're not going to succeed. But at the end of the day, if we push hard enough, these things will come, to fruition. So very excited for it.
Yeah, consistency, like it's true in any space, right? Just like keep coming back, keep taking those at bats, so that and you will connect on one of them, but it's not always going to happen, right? You're not going to. So when you hit that home run, it's all the times that you didn't that really that made that happen, right? So
Exactly.
that's awesome. So something that came out recently, I'm sure you're aware of it. Like I said, I'm a very baseline average guy in this space. I'm not not anywhere near the kind of in-depth knowledge you have, but we've been hearing a lot about this ERC 4337 that was talked about, I think, in ETH Denver. I know it's been in development for a while. Can you break down, just for like the average person, like what does that mean? Is that going to impact us at all? Is that something that we should care about, or is that just some technical thing that most people can just kind of go about their day and will never really interact with?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually made like a post about it on LinkedIn recently. I think that so just to provide some context, ERC 4337 is essentially a standardization of the interfaces for a set of contract that help essentially have smart contracts as wallets, right? A lot of people have been calling that, account abstraction. There are many flavors of account abstraction, but the goal behind this, improvement proposal was essentially to kind of like standardize the process so that like everyone starts like going in the same direction, right? Similarly to ERC 721 and ERC 1155. And so it was it's essentially standardization of, as I mentioned, process for people's wallets to be in the form of on-chain code instead of just off-chain, key pair. And so what it provides is essentially a lot of flexibility as to the set of features that you want to implement. And that includes, for example, providing gasless transactions for end users. And I'm going to explain a little bit how it works at a very brief level. It can also enable, transaction batching, in like signature aggregation for multi-person approval, for groups to kind of like come together and just approve something together. But also just, we've been talking a lot about social recovery and kind of like key recovery, which is absolutely critical to get right in this space. And so, so those are things that can be enabled by this. And one of the misconceptions that like I've read is that those things were not possible before. And the reality is that a lot of people have been building already account abstraction that are pretty much at feature parity with everything that is being advertised for the future of ERC 4337. A lot of people have actually built, this system in a way that is slightly different, but not that much actually. It was just not standardized. So now the goal is actually to standardize it and have everyone work in the same direction on top of the same standard. So standardization is a big deal. The set of features that are enabled by ERC 4337 are important. they're already available. That's the thing. They were already available for quite a bit of time. But now it is just going to be easier for people to integrate with it because there's going to be, a standardization process, just like we're seeing with ERC 721, where, you can start making great optimizations with ERC 721A. You have different variants, that allow kind of like non-transferable tokens, staking, and things that are just get everyone to work in the same direction. So that is pretty important. The way it actually works is, so today, if you're creating a transaction, what's going to happen is your wallet, and some piece of code that like runs either on your mobile, on your ledger, on your computer, in your browser, will create a transaction based on inputs that you provide, whether you want to send money to someone else, whether you want to interact with a blockchain contract. And here the difference is that instead of taking this transaction and submitting it to the blockchain directly, what's going to happen is that this transaction is actually going to be included in another transaction, which we call meta transaction. And essentially those meta transactions can actually contain several of those kind of, we will call it user transactions. And so in the case of like ERC 4337, it's called a user operation. And so those kind of signed messages can be like batches of those can be included as part of meta transactions that are sent to the blockchain to something that is called an entry point. That is just going to be the entry point of this this like on-chain wallet machine. And then it's going to be sent to each one of the wallets after verification for execution on-chain. And so what happens is that each one of those transactions can actually be executed just like before, and essentially run against the contract that lives on-chain. And the contract that lives on-chain will have the logic of understanding what you want to do. Do you want to essentially let someone else pay for the gas? Do you want to get several friends to approve a transaction? And there are going to be a lot more things that can be enabled through that. So it's more about having kind of an ecosystem of standardized contract on chain that will help enable those features, and essentially including each one of the transactions inside top level transactions that can pay for the gas, that can have the logic of retrying at a moment where the gas is probably cheaper, right? And a bunch of other use cases that I'm very excited about to have standardized. And it is going to be a great improvement for the space to work together towards those features.
That's great. And that seems like, honestly, it solves a lot of those problems that really are still in the way of adoption, right? Like that type of efficiency, that type of, plug and play of this one standardization across, those different things that everyone's doing all the time. And then, we saw in the bull run when Ethereum was at $4,500, gas costs start to get, to be an issue for people, right? So if you want mass adoption, especially on Ethereum mainnet, you definitely need things like this that are doing those little optimizations that are going to make that experience easier for the end user and just easier to adopt for anyone, right? Because it's really hard for any large company to want to start doing things on chain in large quantities. If we get into that situation again where zero point 0.01 is $40 for a transaction, well, it's like if you're doing hundreds of those a day, and if you're a company that's maybe saying, hey, we're using this to cover the gas for these, for our customers or whatever. Like you said, you can have someone else cover it. They don't also don't want to be bleeding out money to just run transactions. So this is great. That's like an amazing explanation. I read a little bit and I sort of caught bits and pieces of that, but you obviously have a much better understanding of it. And obviously standardization of these things that I'm sure people you said were already creating was already kind of happening, but really getting a standard set of code for that is going to be extremely helpful. And that's awesome. So thanks so much. I think that you actually I have a question I want to ask later, but you kind of got into it a little bit there, is because I think this does lead to adoption, right? Like I think there's still some roadblocks in the way of adoption. Bureaucratic red tape is one of them that we talked about earlier with your project there. Large companies stay away from this space sometimes because of that too, because they know that they might. spend a lot of time and resources on getting folks to develop amazing things, and folks like yourself to spend so much time building code, and it works perfectly, and then you hit that last roadblock of some of the red tape that's around this space. And it seems to be the red tape only shows up when we're not in like a bull market and things are flying and everyone's making money and it's okay. But as soon as we hit this financial point where people are losing money, crypto's being shown in a very kind of bad light once again, kind of mainstream. Suddenly large companies are moving away. I remember I'm not a big football guy, but I do watch the Super Bowl once a year. This year there was no mention of crypto. Last year, every commercial was a crypto commercial in some regard, right? So it's just interesting how that ebbs and flows. So I think adoption is something that we always talk about in the space. It's something everyone's hoping for. Those of us like me that hope we're early in this space, and we'll maybe reap the benefits of that one day, are hoping for that big adoption to come. And I think it will come. But so I think that solves a lot of the issues that are there. But also, in your opinion, what are some other like major key factors that are really stopping us from getting to that next level where we want to get to?
Yeah, that is a great and extremely hard question. I do believe that there are different angles to adoption. Yeah, I feel like the first one is certainly kind of regulatory. I do feel like legal compliance and regulatory and policy are just aspects that we in the crypto space need to do a much better job at, because if you look at, I think that like a great example actually of so I'm going to take a step back. You have like essentially different ways to kind of regulate essentially a space, right? Like you have the kind of top down, and you have like the bottom up. And the top is essentially kind of various agencies and commissions that observe whatever is being done by the space, and then try to find the the bad actors as part of it, or actors that may be construed as bad, and they essentially go at them and make examples out of them and use that as precedents essentially for creating bills and essentially additional sanctions. That's the first way. The second way is the space. Well, there are actually three ways. The second one is when regulators and agencies work hand in hand with people in the space to essentially find what are the set of best practices, and essentially everyone works on their side of the house, both kind of like bill making and proposals and building essentially a law that will enable innovation, but at the same time define reasonable kind of limits to where innovation should happen in a way that actually protects consumers. And then there is the third version, which is everything is bottom up. And I think that the bottom up part is essentially an industry proactively coming up with a set of just best practices, self-regulation frameworks essentially, and just for example, asset support framework for Coinbase and Anchorage and Fireblocks and others essentially do not they don't support like anything under the sun, right? Like it actually goes through a fairly rigorous asset support framework that ensures that those are not securities and they're actually safe for the customers to hold and use, and so on. And so those are the type of things that the space will need to do more and more essentially to kind of self-regulate, because we're seeing a few people who are really interested in Congress and Senate and in various agencies to really work closely with the space. Some others aren't, and this is also on us to convince people that it is a bet worth taking, right? Like we really need to work with, regulators on everything essentially that the space is doing, and really just a lot of it is education. At the end of the day, so many people that are in a position to make decisions do not have the technical chops essentially to understand what makes sense even from a technical standpoint, as a requirement. Should we enforce things like travel rule, which is a requirement on, travel rule, for those who don't know, is essentially requirements for banks in the US. And whenever a consumer, essentially a person transacts more than a certain amount, banks are essentially required on both end of the transaction to KYC the other party, the recipient or the sender at the other bank. And so those are things that, for example, you can't really enforce at the L1 level, right? Like those are things that some regulators, if they don't have the proper and necessary kind of education, will require from layer ones, right? But the goal is not to have that at the layer one. The goal is to have that at one level above, right? Like the institution that actually interacts with the network. So this is just like one example of the set of kind of like the road of education that needs to happen for regulators. The second part is we really have to just come as an industry with a set of frameworks to self-regulate. And for those who don't know, there is this a great kind of success in another industry, in the payment industry, was the PCI the PCI standards. So essentially, the payment industry is, kind of enforces a set of requirements in order to be able to process, or essentially be a merchant, or any role essentially as part of the payment industry is fairly encoded in terms of and very rigorously encoded in terms of requirements. And this set of requirements was actually proposed and passed, quote unquote, by the industry players themselves, right? Like Visa and MasterCards and others that actually came together as an industry and said, well, we know better. So we're essentially going to make the list of requirements, to kind of like regulate the space, and essentially push that to regulators to have that as just, the set of requirements to be, trusted institution in the space. And so I do believe that this is a major victory that we should all learn from. If we can create something that looks like PCI for the space, would be great. I've had many conversations with various, kind of like top folks at top companies in the space, and we're trying to see what it could look like essentially, to have a PCI for crypto, and really enabling the space to have just a much better reputation. So I do believe that it's probably going to be path to adoption is going to be mostly that, because once you have that, you build a trust with the consumer, and you build a trust with the regulators and essentially official entities. So very, very excited for that to happen. Really believe that this is going to be probably the P0 for the space. We have a lot of problems with those because everyone wants everything, decentralized, and we cannot be. My personal take is that we cannot be too idealistic on those things, because at the end of the day, you need to answer to someone, right? Like regulators want to talk to someone or a group of people, right? And understand exactly who is doing what, and with what constraints, and what do they have in mind whenever they build, like what type of controls do they apply, because we cannot have the system be the Wild West either, right? Like there needs to be law and in order, to a certain degree, essentially, for the space to progress.
I'm in Canada here, and we've had the Interact platform in all of our payments for years. And so when I want to send digital, transaction, it's authorized through my bank. They know who I am when I receive it. Even if I'm just selling something used, it's not a problem. I don't get taxed on it or anything. But if I was getting, $10,000, $5,000, $20,000 every day from people, then they have a way to look into who are these people, who's the sender, who's the receiver, things like that, right? It seems I know in Europe there's a lot of things like that as well. It's more the US where you have these Zelle and Cash App and these things where you can still kind of anonymously send money to people. And I mean, obviously that's what they want to stop, money moving for illegal goods, and they want to stop, money they can't tax, right? Like that's that's the big regulatory concern there. But I think you really brought up three different realities there. There's a reality where the government is against us and doesn't want to work with us, right? Doesn't want to regulate things, and they're actively trying to kill the space. There's one where they're coming to the space and saying, "Hey, we think this is great, but we need to regulate it. Can you guys help us?" And the third one, which is the more likely one, is the space coming to them and saying, "Listen, we understand this appears like the Wild West. We want to formalize it. We want to give you the security and safety that we know that consumers need to adopt this, and we know that we need to actually have regulation in order for us to grow and to be seen, as a serious option going forward with payment networks and transactions and things like that, right? So I think there's really three, and it's a pendulum from a hard no on the regulation side of the government is against you, all the way to you coming to them, and then somewhere in between. Hopefully we get to that middle point. I think we have to start at the end point, like you said, where the space is coming, we're developing these things and bringing them to them, and then eventually you build that trust, and then that's when they'll start to work with you. Just to expect them to want to do the work to jump in and regulate the space because they're good guys and they just want to do it and they see a future is not going to happen, right? So I think that we really have to create that case, and like I said, it is every time that we go through these cycles, and bad actors get washed out, and we see exchanges go down, we see lots of things happen. I think that this next time around we do have a clearer picture of kind of who the blue chip and kind of pieces of the space are, right? The different organizations and actors in the space, and that way who you can bring forward and say, what, these are the people we want to represent us. They know what's going on. They have the right intentions, and they're willing to work with the regulators on this, because you don't want the people who are hardcore decentralization. It's never going to grow with that attitude, right? We have to meet in the middle somewhere, I think, is the reality.
Yeah, and like if you look at actually the and that's a great summary. But if you look at the numbers, it's actually very interesting because U.S. regulated entities that actually, for example, custody digital assets, didn't have a problem. There hasn't been essentially a U.S. regulated entity that has like had any accounting issue or kind of security flaw. There has been essentially nothing but great work that has been done in the US, and so there needs to be some form of there needs to be some form of recognition of that, right, by the US government and various agencies that are trying to provide some oversight. It is very clear that regulations work, right? But at the end of the day, right now, there hasn't been as much clarity on a lot of things. But for the companies that try to operate per the same essentially kind of standards as the one that are already out there for digital assets specifically, but also try to apply the standards from the traditional banking industry, we're actually seeing great results with those, right? Like we understand that regulations are good because we've seen very recently what happens when people kind of actually get just right outside of the US, operate from there, and essentially try to dodge essentially do the bare minimum when it comes to regulations. And so yeah, there will be setbacks, there will be FTXs that just essentially hurt the entire space and hurt countless hours of essentially manpower on building this entire space, both on the technical side but also a lot of on the non-technical, as I mentioned. And so yeah, it is. We are against a lot of things. We are against, kind of like a traditional banking industry that may not be as receptive to the set of things that we're trying to implement and change essentially in the status quo. We're also up against, kind of like a lack of expertise essentially from regulators on what we're trying to achieve, and we're also up against a lot of malicious actors that will try to take advantage of the space as a whole. And so we have to essentially fight all those threats at the same time, and we have to succeed. There's no other choice.
And I think that the reality there, you touched on some of the big names that we've all heard of over the last year. That FTX and things like that, is that it's not the medium that's the problem, right? I think that's what we need to make clear. Is it's like crypto itself is just code. There's nothing wrong with the code. It's not evil. It doesn't rip people off, right? It's people. It's greed. It's the same problem we have with regular, like the Bernie Madoffs of the world, right? Like when he pulled his scam, people didn't blame U.S. currency; they blamed him. But for some reason, this latest FTX thing, they start blaming the whole crypto, space, at least on the mainstream side, and like it's just not true, right? Like, so that's definitely something that I was thinking about. And then also, just to change gears a little bit, just trying to think of things that are happening that are really changing the space in big ways. I think is we do have this marketplace wars going on right now, right? So there's a bunch of them out there. We know that, but there's two big ones that are kind of going head to head right now. They're doing a lot of interesting things around their own fees, around creator fees. I do want to get into Rebels a little bit with you after, but just as someone who is a founder who is running, a project, and there's definitely costs associated with that royalties definitely help with. Obviously, they help more when you have a really high, floor price and your volume is crazy. But that's not, 99% of projects, that's not the case right now. But even then, it is a way to bring in a little bit of revenue for the project just to keep things afloat. I think even just the costs of running servers and things like that, right? So how do you feel about this removal of royalties? Do you think it's kind of, are they doing it temporarily? Is it just kind of a victim of this war that's happening? Or do you think this is going to be the way forward? And how do you really expect to see people still want to build things, right? Or do you think that we're going to wash out a lot of low quality builders this way, and we're only going to have people that are bringing real utility because they can't rely on that secondary royalty market to line their pockets and or run their project?
Yeah, that's probably one of the most interesting kind of dilemmas and challenges that I've seen within the space. I used to have many opinions about that. I guess like the reality is that and just like everywhere, the market is going to do what the market is going to do, right? And what we can do is essentially just all adapt, regardless of our role, right? Like whether you are working as a community manager, whether you are starting an NFT project, whether you are a bigger sized company that wants to start a NFT strategy, or whether you were kind of a collector. There are just so many different things that you know that can happen still with the royalty war, I will call it. I think that for the longest time, honestly, I really did believe that it was a very strong incentive alignment tool that we had essentially to get projects and brands essentially to develop value for holders over time, essentially for the same kind of assets, and kind of like same collectibles. And when I mean value, I actually mean experiences. I'm talking about actually building additional experiences, building access to digital and physical experiences, and in various shape of forms. Whether we're talking about gaming, whether we're talking about just having access to events and other things. And so from that standpoint, I do feel like it is a great tool. We cannot enforce royalties. I mean, you can technically do a few things to enforce them, but then you're kind of hindering the user experience and a lot of other things. At the end of the day, if they cannot easily be enforced, the reality is that, you know, there's going to be kind of this race over a long enough period of time. There's going to be this race essentially to to get them to zero for the vast majority of the project, because the connection, like it's almost like if you cannot enforce them, then this is you volunteering essentially to kind of like donate, right, to in a sense to the project. And so from that standpoint, I really do believe that the vast majority of the space is not gonna donate, quote unquote, to kind of help kind of like continue building infrastructure and experiences around those the same digital assets. And so we're just gonna see a shift, I believe, towards, we're already seeing a lot of primary sales, but I do believe that we're gonna see a lot more of them for any additional feature, right? It is gonna be, you're not gonna be in a position where you get essentially kind of, let's say kind of like token A, and you get kind of all the features in the future associated to this one, essentially, free. They're just going to be probably just the in-app purchase kind of equivalent for NFTs, and this is kind of like how I see it evolve. Because at the end of the day, there needs to be some form of like recurring cost. I do believe that a lot of people, and for Rebels as well, people are just asking like, how are the funds used, etc. And like, very few people understand that if you want to have it structured as a business to actually have, people with, contracts and like having kind of like lawyers that help you maintain your incorporation, and sometimes you want to change a few things. If you want to like, write, like essentially implement terms and services agreements. And there are just like a ton of different things, just legal, technical, obviously as well, and like, various servers and building any form of infrastructure, whether that's web app or, kind of like deeper in the back end experiences as well. And so at the end of the day, those costs, like people need to understand that projects like NFT projects are businesses, right? That need to operate in a profitable way. And so from that standpoint, there will need to be additional revenue stream. I do believe that it should not be NFT centric. Like no company in the world should like just be NFT centric. I strongly believe that the vast majority of the companies, any company actually, should have a revenue model that actually works without the NFTs, and NFTs are just an enabler to provide additional interoperability. Because at the end of the day, if you look at kind of Counter-Strike skins, right? Like it works because you built an ecosystem, you have like some sort of assets that work in this ecosystem, right? But they're not NFTs. And the reason why they're not NFTs is that the company doesn't need or doesn't want to make them interoperable, right? And to allow other people to kind of like take it outside of the ecosystem and just do more with them. And that is fine, right? But like the ecosystem should be strong enough so that like people are drawn to it regardless of the structure and the kind of like limits that the assets have. So that's kind of like how I think about it. Right now, we're seeing a very big rush towards from Blur specifically to kind of, it's a race to like raising the volume, and the volume is obtained by trading. So there is kind of like over financialization essentially that is happening across the board. So I personally very much dislike it because I have a very different vision on like how NFTs like will progress, and I do believe that the vast majority of the time, like NFTs should, just like Starbucks did, should not be advertised as such. Like if the user doesn't even know that it is an NFT behind the scene, then there is kind of like less psychological effect around like speculation on the asset. And that's something that I'm actually very interested, because at the end of the day, like 30, 40 years from now, if we want the technology to succeed, it is going to be about like the interesting kind of value that you get out of it from an experience standpoint, and the use cases that are unlocked for you as an end user. So yeah, all that to say that I admire what OpenSea was trying to do, or is continuing trying to do. At the end of the day, right now the incentives are, I feel like, not as aligned, because the marketplaces want to push their own volume and to make kind of like a cut on this volume. And so trading is the most important thing for them, regardless of royalties. They don't make money when the creator makes money, and that's what I'm trying to get to. They make money when there is volume, when there is trading. And so I do believe that if we start getting like a marketplace, for example, that takes a cut only of on-chain royalties, then there is like an incentive alignment between the two. But until then, I do believe that the spaces will run to zero in terms of royalties, not like a zero as a whole.
Good clarification. And we'll see. This volume that we've been seeing, a lot of it is the same few wallets really just moving money around, kind of wash trading, especially because the fees are low. There's obviously the Blur farmers out there for airdrops right now. Although I think continuous airdrops and literally giving away money is not going to be a great sustainable long-term business plan. So you really have to, I know they're trying to take ownership of the top spot in the space, and disruptors always do that, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, though, right? So it is a limited approach.
I'm not even sure like who's on the buy side for the Blur token, because the way I see it is that you essentially have a lot of people who are farming the token and then just selling as soon as they get it, and like they might sell like a portion of it and keep the rest, like hoping that like it will go up. But like at the end of the day, I'm not too sure like who's on the buy side of the Blur token. That's the thing that was always curious.
I was looking when it launched because I was very curious. I'm like, how is the price going up? Because my experience when you drop people free money is that they sell immediately and that token goes to zero. And I was actually seeing additional liquidity being added, $20,000, $50,000 from them consistently throughout the day, which was kind of, I think, making the price go up, which then led some folks to maybe buy in thinking that they were seeing some price appreciation and some interest. So I think it was sort of a little bit of a false, pump, for lack of a better term, there, because they're adding liquidity on their side. That's not people investing in. You're just adding more liquidity to the pile, right? So it was. It was a little bit interesting, and they weren't minting more tokens as a result, right? It was just an add liquidity transaction. And I saw it every 10, 20 transactions because I'm a nerd and I like to watch them go by and figure out try and see what's really happening, right? And yeah, I think that, you really hit on a few things. These drops where people were paying, 0.08, 0.1, 0.12 for an NFT, a Genesis NFT with promises of later on they're going to get XYZ. And, all these airdrops were happening. And 2 years ago, that was no problem, right? When there was lots of money going around, like that 7.5% or 5% that people were getting on hundreds and hundreds of ETH of volume a day for some projects, was not an issue for them to do all these airdrops. But now, we got to this point when we really hit, started to hit bottom. We're still going to keep going. But people started doing these free mints, but really high royalties, right? And we saw a few like Goblin Town and a few of those degen plays really like pump crazy volume, go to multiple Ethereum floor, 6 ETH floor or something like that. And that, people thought, okay, we can sustain this way. We can do free mints and we can have crazy secondary volume and we'll live off the royalties. But now that's taken away as well too. And it's crazy to see in a short time span, really, people, if someone launches something for like 0.02 or 0.01 mint, people won't even touch it sometimes. It has to be a free mint or it has to be a manifold open edition before they'll touch it, right? It's crazy how the attitudes have changed, but it's like if people are creating things for free and then you want them to drop you more things, but you don't want to pay royalties, like it doesn't make sense, right? Something has to give. And I do believe that this is going to wash out a lot of the low quality builders in the space, right? And people who have a real plan, who are running a real profitable business, like you said, minus the NFTs, those are the folks who are going to be able to make things happen. And I think that in other spaces, like obviously gaming is a big space that lots of folks in our space are into as well. And gamers have pretty much universally said for a long time they hate NFTs, right? And I think the average gamer who's not into crypto, not into NFTs, what they see is they see the same news stories everyone sees. They see people paying $1 million for a picture of a monkey and they think it's stupid. Or they see people who are on Instagram or on Twitter and they're showing off their Ferrari and and they have their Bored Ape as their picture. And I think the Bored Apes are cool personally, like the art's cool, but like I'm just saying people see that and if they're not in this space, they're like, basically for lack of a better term, fuck that guy. I don't want to be any part of that. So when they hear the term NFTs, they don't want to touch it, right? And I think that games could really benefit greatly by using this technology. And I think, like you said, it's important that they're using it without even knowing they're using it. It just needs to be the backbone of what's going on. And I think that is that peak of adoption, right? Is when people are using this tech and they don't know they're using this tech, then we've made it, right? When it's no longer being classified as, oh, you're into NFTs. It's like, no, you're into going to concerts. So you're using Ticketmaster and they're using NFTs and you don't know it, right? Like I'm not saying they are, but they might be one day, right? So
can you imagine it? Like at the end of the day, NFT is just a container for information, right? Like you're just kind of at the like individual token level, you're just like storing some metadata, right? That is just gonna describe whatever it is that you hold, and then you have this kind of like 2-column list of, well, token ID X is gonna have like owner Y, right? And you just have like this mapping, and that's pretty much what it is. Can you imagine that like people would like speculate the same way on like, wow, I received like a TCP packet or a UDP packet or like like ICMP? That it sounds exactly the same to me. It's like it is like I see it really as a medium, a protocol, a container, and like an envelope, right, around essentially some data. And it is really clearly not sustainable, right? Like the value of emails the value of emails is the ability to communicate with each other, right? And having kind of like a track record of like this person sent that in this order, and like this is this thread, this is this other thread, this is this conversation, and so on. NFTs are no different. And at the end of the day, like an email conversation is not valuable because like you got it in a certain envelope, instead of another. And so I really do see NFTs the same way. Like what matters at the end of the day is what they enable, the experience. And so no, I'm very excited for a lot of things that are gonna happen. We're missing a lot of even very basic blocks for NFTs to actually take on more use cases. If you think about the set of things that we interact with in the digital world, so much of it is encrypted, for example, right? Encryption for NFT is something that everyone is really very much struggling with. You should have kind of like private NFTs that should be sent, that could kind of carry different types of information and other things. And so, I really do believe that we're very much at the beginning. At the end of the day, it is probably going to be hidden. The vast majority of it is going to be hidden to the end user, and that's great. That's perfectly fine. Because what matters at the end of the day is the experience.
Mm-hmm. And I think about it very much because I'm 35, so I've been around for a bit, like before the internet. And like I think about it that we use so many things right now in our day-to-day life, and I mean not me and you, but maybe folks who are not technical at all, and they don't even realize when they're using the internet and when they're not. Like when is it on device? When is it something where they're being connected? Right. And that's the internet itself has become this sort of like just thing that exists that people don't think about. And it was something that in the early 90s, when my dad was setting up our home computer and we were arguing about, getting IP addresses and stuff with the dial-up company to get our internet set up, like it was very difficult to use, right? It's very much reflective of the space we're in now. If I tell a friend, hey, go get into NFTs, that means nothing to them, right? They don't know how to go and set up a MetaMask on their computer, and they don't know how to get, actual funds into that wallet. They don't know how to create, transactions to buy. Like it seems simple to us because we do it every day, but like the average person is still like, what do I do, right? They're gonna have to watch 10 YouTube videos, and they're probably still gonna get rugged for all their money, right? Like, so I think when it is something that is quintessential, and it just happens, it just works, it's just part of everyday life, that's when we know that that technology's really made it, right? And like I said, people, like when our Wi-Fi goes out and my wife, goes to do something and she can't do it, and I have to explain, well, no, like that's pulling from somewhere, right? It's not on your phone, right? So that's the thing, right? It's like it's people don't even think about it at this point, and I think that's when you've hit that real point of adoption where it is just a fabric of the background of something you use, right? And I think that's what NFTs can become. Things like driver's licenses and that. I know there's some exploration there on Apple's side in the States, doing it in a few different states. But I think things like that, right? We shouldn't be carrying little plastic cards around still in 2023. It seems insane, right? There should be a better technical, like we have a phone, like there should be a way to utilize that to our advantage in all aspects. I shouldn't need to carry my wallet around with little plastic cards that I've been using for 20 years, or they've been in use for 100 years, right? It's crazy. So sort of touching on that as well, bringing value as a creator. We have seen on the Psychedelics Anonymous side, they've now created this new Dawn system where you can kind of trait swap. I'm curious on your thoughts of that. Obviously, it's a great way to have some revenue through charging to do that, and then also it does create, I think, a bit of an issue with rarity for the collectors and for the speculators out there, because we did see a big effect to their floor price of their Genesis NFT once people could start making exactly what they had, right? So having a certain set of traits was no longer something I had to go and pay 5 or 6 times the floor price for, because I could really go and piece it together myself, right? And I think that's what we saw, that effect there. But how do you feel about projects doing things like that? Would Rebels ever do something like that? I know it probably requires you to recode the whole thing, but just curious what you think about that system.
I'm a very big fan of New Dawn. I'm very close to Vultura, by the way. We call often and have a lot of chats. I'm a very big fan. I do believe that one of the measurements for success for NFTs is the number of times that they're being used before being sold. And floor price actually for me is the worst metric possible, because you're just creating kind of like a artificial entry bar, for people to join. And like, it only works, like thinking about the floor price only works if you're trying to build kind of like a private club, right? Which is not the case for PA, which is not the case for Rebels. That's not, we're not in the business of creating just like closed clubs. And so from our standpoint, I do believe that Volt and I just like think extremely similarly, that just NFTs need to be used, right? And like otherwise there's no point. And the speculation part is only present because the experience is not there. If you were to actually like be able to just use them, you wouldn't think as much. You can think like a little bit about it, but like you wouldn't think as much about it, right? Like if you think about skins for Counter-Strike, like I like just like referring to that. Like you think about it like you're happy that you got your thing, but at the end of the day, you wouldn't play the game if you did not enjoy it, but you still had like a good skin, right? Like the end of the day, you're not in the game to just purely flex. You're there to enjoy. You're there to compete. You're there to beat other people. You're there to release tension from like a rough day. And so I do believe that at the end of the day, anything that pushes in this kind of direction of make NFTs usable instead of simply kind of like static things is a huge success. There are different ways to do it. There is this one where you actually take kind of like a very explicit kind of like customization approach to it, and there are different ways to do it. You can have something that is ad only, almost kind of like an app-in only thing where, for example, for Rebels, it was like mostly patches. One thing that like, we started like very early trying to think through is like, what if we modified assets and colors, etc., and like the the complexity there is mostly technical. Like we can, like I can do it, and I showed it, for example, as a demo for the community that like I can do it on the server, but just like building the infrastructure around it and just like maintaining it is like thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, because like re-rendering constantly just costs a lot of money, and so I do believe that it's something that is probably going to work best for either like fully 2D projects or things that are closer to, you know, Psychedelics Anonymous, which is kind of like pre-rendered assets that are like put in front of each other. Well, like the light is not going to be as natural, but you're still going to have this kind of like 3D feeling that is obviously not extremely realistic, but it's like great enough so that like you can kind of like play with those different kind of layers of pre-rendered assets and colors. So all that to say that I love the concept. I'm a very big fan of Vault. You know, every time that I can help, I try, and every time that I will be able to help, I will try. At the end of the day, speculation for the space is the thing that is actually very interesting about this one is that the vast majority of the time, the assets that like, or at least kind of like the tokens that have a roadmap associated to them, whenever the roadmap like milestone is executed on, it actually goes down. And the reason for this is there is this constant kind of like speculation for like it is gonna go up, and then you realize that like, you know, it is not, and so it actually goes down because there is no like really necessary like you as a holder is the person that like project kind of founder is trying to cater to, not the next person necessarily, right? In some cases that is the case, but in some of the cases, like you're the person that I'm trying to satisfy, and so I'm not trying to create like another entry point for someone to come and just like buy something from you. And so I do think that, you know, something like New Dawn is, so first and foremost was advertised, and for the longest time is something that like, you know, was talked about, and I'm very glad that like this is being released. The floor is what it is, and you know, holders are going to do what they're going to do. At the end of the day, if you're not willing to use your NFT, then that means that, you know, you're in just for the wrong reasons, and so as a result, like I don't see how you know, kind of like putting in place some form of like, you know, pyramid shaped business is really going to help, right? So I really feel very strongly about that, and that this is the kind of infrastructure that will get the space to the next step.
Awesome. Yeah. And like for myself, I've been doing a lot of experimenting. I really want to launch something just for fun. Like I'm not trying to run a business, just literally a fun project.
Oh, you should.
And it's good.
How can I help?
Yeah, I think you'll be surprised. It's not going to be anything that great. But, you know, I'm not a great visual artist. Like I play music. I can do a lot of things artistic, but it's visual art and drawing, not great at it. But I started exploring a little bit with even just adding, you know, things to some of my NFTs I have, right? Or taking pieces and layers and building them and changing things. And on a 2D image, it is really simple to do, right? And then I started working. I have a friend who's a great 3D artist, and he does amazing things in Blender that blow my mind. And I think I sent you one of his examples the other day. And I was like, you know what? Let's check out Blender. It's free. I can download it. Like, let me see. And I started. First of all, I couldn't make anything do anything. I had to watch a tutorial to learn how to like do step one, which I was like, okay, I'm already probably too far in here for myself. And then I started watching probably the same, you know, make a donut tutorial that everyone's watched on YouTube. There's a guy who releases it. And it's really good. It's really detailed. He updates it every year. Shout out to that guy.
Yeah, I did it. I'm not gonna shy away from it.
Yeah. No, shout out to that guy. I don't want to, I don't remember his name, but yeah. And I'm like, this is friggin' hard. And then you start playing around with the lights and stuff like that. And then I think about something like Rebels, and I'm like, it's clearly made in that 3D space with lighting. And if you look at the Rebels and you see how the light hits them and how different hats and different materials react, right? It's not something where you can then just take that 3D element that's been, you know, obviously flattened and start pulling layers apart and moving them around, because it doesn't look right.
Exactly.
So I think that's what people need to understand. I think for anyone who doesn't understand that, download Blender, lose your mind for a couple hours, and you'll quickly understand why it's very, very difficult. So, and I think that, yeah, we have seen on the and I'm a PA holder as well, and I love the art, and the community is great and what Volt's doing. And I think it is that pre-rendered. It is all sort of the same light source. It is a lot easier and it looks good. Like it does work well on their collection too, right? But yeah, for someone like me who's a collector and other collectors out there, sometimes you have like, oh, I absolutely love this character in this collection that I have, but I just wish the background was blue or something. And to be able to actually make that change on your actual token, obviously I can go into Procreate on my iPad and do it very quickly. But if I want it to actually look like that way, on the actual token itself, when I pull up OpenSea and it pulls that art and it's been changed, like that's awesome, right? So I think that there is probably a future for that. I think it does take away from some of those folks who were hoping to get rich on that. They held, the ape with the golden laser beam, hat, these crazy traits that get out there in some of these collections that people are like, it doesn't even look good. It's just that it's super rare, so people are paying it crazy money for them. So I think it does take away from that. I know that you're not a guy who really loves the speculative nature of the space, and like you've mentioned very publicly multiple times that you can't wait for that part of it to end. And I don't know if it'll ever fully end, but I think we're seeing it start to die out, and I think that it will really wash out some of the low quality stuff.
It's actually pretty interesting because I actually felt like recently it was actually the opposite. So it's kind of like relative to the kind of like size of the stuff that was being put out there. I was actually seeing kind of like the lower quality stuff raise, and actually kind of like and essentially kind of like because of the royalty thing, just like people just spamming like even more kind of like primary drops. And then the technology side, like the vast majority of the people are just like heads down creating things and just like keeping them in store for the essentially the next uptick in the market. And so I do personally feel like the quality kept going down, but it might just be that like I'm seeing kind of like engineers and builders just being more quiet, and that's fine, but it's more kind of like related to the amount of signals that I used to get. Now like the kind of like build like people shipping is like a very innovative stuff is actually going down compared to like the rest.
Yeah, and I think that it depends on what you're presenting it as, right? Like for instance, like what I'm creating is literally just something that I drew that's fun and that's going to be like a free or very low cost thing to mint. That's like the whole idea. It's not being presented as there's utility, there's a roadmap. It's like, this is something fun I want to do. More an experiment for me of like a generative collection and how that works, and learning a little bit on the contract side for that. Right. So, and I think if you launch something and it's just for fun and you say it's just for fun, great. But also don't expect it to do amazing things and make you rich, right? And then people that are holding it, the same thing, right? So, and there's also like the hardcore art side, right? There's a lot of people, and I've learned a lot about that space. The people who are artists in this space who they only release one of ones, and they people buy them for 20 Ethereum in a bid and things like that, right? Like, so we have we're seeing that as well, and those are also the people who are all usually most likely going to click yes and add creator royalties when they sell or if they sell, right? So I think that we are seeing these little different compartmentalized pieces of the space, and sometimes they interact and sometimes they don't, right? And sometimes people are launching something. I'm not trying to plug other things I hold here because there's definitely, there's no big advantage to this one for me, but AI Objects, I don't know if you've seen it, but like they did it's basically a 10,000 piece, and all it was a creator pass, and you used it to log in, and we all picked a shoe. I'm a sneakerhead. So you picked a shoe, and you picked a color, and you were able to actually change it a bit. It's a really cool interface. And they went from 10,000, and we voted as a community, voted. So you're using your tokens to vote, right? Down to 1. And then they were actually producing the shoe that we all chose. So it's just it was a community collaborative, curation of a product. And I'm like, that's really cool and innovative. And no, it's horrendously down in price, but it's a really fun experience. So I don't care, right? And people are active in that server and they're excited. And they went to Art Basel and they 3D printed the top 30 shoes at the time. That was our top 30 that we were narrowing it down from, and they're doing a lot of cool things, right? And like, so that's fun and exciting. And for me, it was absolutely not about trying to flip it for any financial gain, but they're going to keep making products that way. And as someone who is, I'm into sneakers. I'm into, certain types of fashion and stuff to a degree. And I'm into things. I like products, right? It's cool to be part of that project, and be able to have a say in something like that. So I think that we'll see more and more things like that where I'm happy to get excited to just continue to hold that in my wallet and participate in that project. And I don't care if it ever becomes valuable or not, because to me, the value is that experience, the people I connect with, right? Things like that. I'm not trying to plug this project. I'm just saying it's cool. I think those are the sort of things that you'll see people start to move towards, when the speculative side is not, the big moneymaker in the space. You will have people that are there for the right reasons in those projects, and you won't get people destroying projects, and fudding them and going crazy on Twitter, when they're there for the wrong reasons, right?
Yeah, I actually have like a question on this, because the thing that was very interesting to me is, so now I would say that kind of the NFT craze started quite a while ago, right? It's what, like a year and a half almost. I think like end of 2021, like October, that it started. Things started to, yeah, like really started to pick up like pretty crazily. And the part that is actually interesting is that a lot of projects were essentially promising tons of different things: a metaverse, a set of games, experiences, IRL, digital jobs, whatever, in physical objects, etc. And the reality is that today, the people who are today kind of like seeing the result of like those things that either didn't happen or happened but actually like no one cares. I actually feel like quite a bit of stuff was released from various projects, but actually no one cared, because the reality is that people just don't spend their time working on random kind of like indie, games. Like, that's the reality. People don't spend their times in kind of online chat rooms where they get to see like other people moving around. Like, that was called Second Life, and I don't think it really worked. And so, I mean, it worked, but like just for a time, right? And people are just not on Second Life these days, because there are cool things to build on, like Minecraft and others. But at the end of the day, the vast majority of the games that people want to play require two things. The first one is like just a rock solid IP with a story, sometimes a franchise, etc. But also just an immense amount of capital. An immense amount of capital. People don't understand that gaming studios, when they get created, they actually like shop around for funding, in the like 50 $100 million, because this is essentially kind of like the amount of cost that it requires to build, like a decent size, like a decent quality game that will actually get people hooked onto, and just actually be able to make them want to play the next one, or at least like get them excited about this one, and kind of leverage in-app purchases, etc. So I don't know. The way I see it is that the space definitely understands as a whole that whatever is promised, whether that's, like anything that is like outside of like the top 5 to 10 kind of NFT projects, in terms of revenue, is not going to ship something that is satisfactory, because there is kind of like a minimum kind of entry bar in terms of costs to produce like a set of things that make sense for people, and that is just not there yet. So yeah, I feel pretty strongly about this. I really think that at the end of the day, the space will have to evolve in a way that kind of washes out kind of anything that is like promises on like gigantic ecosystems and games, etc. A lot of like, there will be games and there will be ecosystems. I'm not saying that some of them might not succeed in becoming great things, but it should not be kind of the things that you look at for success, right? Like Harry Potter, right? Like, was started by someone just like writing a few books, and then was published. People got like really loved it and really connected with the vast majority of the population, and then games and movies and other things, and an entire franchise, and it's great, right? But like at the end of the day, those things take like a decade, and it's just like one in one in a million books that really kind of like triggers this kind of enthusiasm. So it will be the same for NFTs, and one in a million kind of NFT project will actually get there, and you know, it's fine. But it should not be the default expectation, because the default expectation is that it is just gonna be the equivalent of a T-shirt, like a digital T-shirt, and it's fine.
Yeah, and I think that I love that you managed to get Harry Potter in there. You made it work. I love it. But I think that what people don't realize is that there is a lot of young people in this space who don't understand the cost of some of these things. Something like I'm going to use Yuga as an example because they are probably 3 or 4 of those top 5 projects you're talking about is all owned by them, right? And they're getting crazy royalties. And I looked at their sewer pass for their Dookie Dash game, and I'm like, they made $4 million in royalties in 1 month on a free airdrop, right? Like when you're making that kind of money, you can do things like reskin a 10-year-old game and then release it, right? Like, so, and even that probably had some cost, but people don't realize, I'm not a big gamer actually, which makes me kind of an outsider because a lot of folks in this space are, but, I used to skateboard when I was younger. I love EA Skate. It was one of my favorite games, and they stopped making it for 10, 12 years. And I was like, man, I wish they would just make a new one. And then, EA just basically came out and said like, we can make Madden every year or whatever, soccer game or whatever game they have. And it's like almost exactly the same game and with some tweaks, and it makes $1 zillion. And we can make a brand new bespoke EA Skate game with mapping entirely new cities and stuff like that. And it costs $1 zillion, and it makes next to nothing because the market for that is not the same as a Madden game, or as a FIFA game or whatever, right? So I think people sometimes, and especially I have met a lot of people in the space who are maybe a little more naive on the financial side of what it costs to do these things. They don't realize that, like, the things that seem simple to you or the things you see a render for, like, the render took somebody months and cost tens of thousands of dollars, and to actually make the thing that you think that render is that game or whatever will take hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And huge risk by those investors to do that. And they're not going to do it unless you have, Mario IP or something, or Harry Potter IP or whatever it is, because it's just like people aren't dumb. No one's handing out $100 million checks, based on your NFT that you made in your mom's basement or whatever, right? Like people don't realize that.
Yeah, no, this part is actually pretty insane. I think that I had this conversation so many times actually in the Rebels Discord, and people just not understanding the cost of things. Just they just don't get it, And I think that like a lot of it comes from the fact that very few people have done it themselves, just like creating a business in general, but specifically also like things that, there are kind of like different categories in terms of like quality of artwork, and hopefully you can put like Rebels in terms of like pure artwork in the same, I would say, like in the same category at like Genesis and a couple others, and for example, I would assume that something like Izu or like Genesis probably took on average at least 5 months of like an entire team to build. In the case of like Genesis, I believe that it was actually like 4 years of like a single person just like building all the generative framework for Houdini. But at the end of the day, it's still just such an amount, like such a gigantic amount of time. I think that like just people don't realize, and if you take like the salary of like a great kind of business person, then you take like the salaries of like an entire kind of designer team that is actually pretty skilled, and then you take kind of like the rendering cost, and you take kind of you add a bunch of different things essentially, because there are like trials and errors, and like there are a lot of things that are not going to make it, and so I think that very few people understand that like those things cost like hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Like even so, for example, for Rebels, like I didn't pay myself, and Sass didn't pay himself either. But like, if we were to pay ourselves with like the rate that we have for like our day jobs, like the mint as a whole would not be sufficient at all to cover these things. And I think that like very few people kind of like understand that, there are like just operational costs that are crazy. Like community management, right? Like you have a team that like is really gonna help build an entire community, and you have, in our case, we had a gigantic team. We had like over 20 people, right? Like you have over 20 people that are like in very high demand because it was kind of like everyone wanted, great community managers. So what do? And essentially you have like 20 people on payroll for like, for example, like 8, 9 months. And so that is extremely hard, in terms of cost. So I think that like very few people understand that even to bootstrap something that actually makes sense, and that doesn't even cover marketing and other things, right? That's just like the bare minimum to kind of like get something high quality out. And so, yeah, definitely, I do think that there's going to be a need for kind of like a lot of expectation management and adjustment. And I'm the first one. I don't know if you've noticed, like sometimes like in the Discord, I'm essentially telling people who like make kind of comments, and sometimes constructive, sometimes non-constructive. And my best advice is essentially go do it. Like nothing prevents you from doing it. I think that like everyone should, if they feel like they have the right kind of like insight on community building and what makes sense from like art perspective and what do people want, essentially, go ahead and build it. This is the right time, right? Like this is a world where you can post, for the first time your thing out there and just directly connects to your customers, quote unquote, and users. And so, yeah, I'm very excited about the perspective of just like people starting to like understand a bit more about it. Right now, I feel like I'm talking to just a zillion like extremely experienced business people like on a daily basis who've been like advisors to like Uber and Yelp and etc. And sometimes other people just like really realize what it takes because they've done it once, or they talk to someone and they've seen the journey that it takes to kind of like build a business from scratch and building art. And in general, the people who actually make art themselves just understand what it takes. Like if you went on Blender, you understand the amount of work that went into the collection, as you were kind of pointing out earlier. So yeah, no, I do think that there's going to be a massive need for expectation management. Unfortunately, we're not there because we're still like in a dynamic of a lot of people trying to kind of get the extra profit and the extra kind of both on the collector side, but also on projects that don't have kind of like the mindset of building a business out of it, which is fine. Just be upfront about things. Like we were upfront about the fact like it is always going to be a side project, but you have to be honest about things, right? Like transparency, honesty is, people will value that over everything else in the end.
For sure. And like, I mean, when I was newer to the space, like Rebels was my first like serious NFT project I jumped into, right? That wasn't just, I had done a couple flips and made some money because the space was still great. And then I really liked the art, and a friend of mine showed me Rebels, and I got into it like right when Mint was happening. And, I got really connected with the Samurai. I love the Samurai and Samurai Gang Twitters. It's all me. I made that. And I said, I'm going to make these patches. It'll be cool. And it took me like a few hours to make the patches, like 4 or 5 hours of work making the patches. Cause like I said, I'm not a great visual artist. I had to like learn how to use an app to make it. And then I had to figure, okay, how do I get this on? Like, what's the best way to launch this? And I wanted to give away 20 of them. And then like I did. And then it cost me like $110 US to airdrop 20 to somebody. So when people are talking about 10,000 piece collections airdropping, they don't realize there's just the gas cost alone is like thousands of dollars, right? So there's costs behind all these things is my point.
Deploying the contracts, like uploading the images, like maintaining the images, for example, like itself is just like an immense cost when you have like every single one of them that is like 30 megs, like you're asking for resolution, but the counterpart of that is like holding them on like a server or like IPFS is just like immensely costly, right? So there's just like so much that people need to realize. I don't even believe that like right now the royalties, like the ongoing royalties, cover the cost of just hosting the images. That's kind of like how expensive that is. And so people need to kind of adjust, the expectations for sure.
And like I said, I experienced it on a very, very small level, but like I got excited. I tweeted it out there. Let's get a contest. Let's airdrop these to people. And I didn't even think about like, oh shit, this is no longer a free fun thing I'm doing that's only costing my time. It's actually costing me money to send it to these people. And I'm in Canada, so $110 US is like $150 here, right? Which is like it's not a lot of money, but it's not $5, right? Like it's
Yeah, no.
and you start doing that on a larger scale and you see how that's like $10,000, $20,000 just to drop something, not creating it, just the actual cost to put it in people's wallets, right? Like people don't understand that sometimes. And yeah, like, and I've learned obviously a ton about the space in this time but that was just something that early on I was like, oh, I shouldn't have got so excited, but it was still a fun experience. I'm happy I did it. And, it's the same as like this podcast. This is more time than people realize. Like whoever's listening to this is like an hour and 20 minutes conversation, which we'll wrap up soon. I appreciate the time, sir. But it's an hour and 20 minutes of your day to listen, but it's 5 or 6 hours by the time I'm done with everything, putting this together, right? And making the YouTube video, putting it on all the platforms and doing the art for it and all that stuff. And I love it and I'm going to do it. It doesn't bring me any money and maybe one day it will, maybe one day it won't. I don't care. I enjoy doing this. But people need to realize like everything takes time and time is money for folks. Like I'm a married guy with a kid and a full-time job. Like
Exactly.
6 hours out of my week is a lot. Right. So, we got to appreciate, support the people who are putting this work in and it's not just saying support financially, but support them in understanding, giving that understanding that, hey, this takes time. There's more going on in your life than just this. And it takes money, right? Is the other side.
Yeah, no, for sure. Fully agree. And I think that like it even comes down to communications, for example. Like if you think about Rebel specifically, I think that like a lot of people are like, yeah, we need more communications, etc. But I'm like, yeah, but I'm doing other so first and foremost, I have my main job. Like it's like pure volunteering on the project. The other thing that is interesting is, if I'm answering to people on Discord, this is like time that I'm not, either writing code or like trying to find like the right partnership for this set of things that we're building. And so there is kind of like a trade-off in everything. Like if I'm on Discord, that means that like I'm not on Twitter, potentially kind of like looking at things and retweeting. And so what I would prefer, for example, from people is just how can I help? Like, there are multiple people in the community who have access to the Twitter and I can actually, retweet things because like they know that I don't have the time and they are trusted parties. And so really helping kind of like take ownership of something that, take times and it doesn't like bring like anything financially is something that like everyone like should feel responsibility because they have ownership in the thing, right? Like they have ownership in the outcome of the project. So yeah, that is something that I really connect with, and then it's a craft, and you have to kind of at some point I think that like I don't know if you saw like Zach XBT just like announced that he's gonna stop taking people's requests because people would just expect him to work for free, and like I know Zach really well. I guess like I can call him a friend at this point. And so the whenever we chat, this is just mind-boggling because like people keep asking things from me, far from him, and like we have conversations about like the fact that we both know how valuable his time is. Like I know exactly how much like a pretty top tier like investigator costs in general, just like whether that's like in digital systems, and it's going to be essentially kind of like people who come whenever there is an incident like a major hack, and then they're going to like look around and trying to track essentially what went wrong. It's not called like a PI, it's not like a private investigator, but it is someone who's going to kind of like find the threads and follow them in a like a digital environment, and that costs a lot of money, and like their rate is extremely high for the best ones. Like if you look at like Mandiant and CrowdStrike and others, obviously those are just gigantic companies that help with incident response. And I don't understand that like people, to this day don't understand that it just costs a lot of money. They expect him to work for free, and that is not sustainable. Web3 doesn't mean that like you're working for others for free. It is just a way to remove intermediates between the creator or like the business and their users, right? In a way that is a lot more fair. And so there are like a lot of misconceptions that I'm eager to have removed like at the end of the day. Like for example, for Rebels, never said that like anything would be free, and then everyone like a bunch of people are just like, well, I'm not receiving a patch for free. And I'm like, no, we never said that. And it's like, but it's Web3. I'm sorry, this is not like Web3 is not like web volunteering. It's and so yeah, no, I'm
I think they misheard. They heard Web 3 and they thought it was Web free. So that's the problem.
exactly.
But I mean, like, I think the easiest example is, I have a family member. He's an electrician. Would I say come to my house and wire my whole basement for free? Like, would I expect that from them, even as a family member? No. Like, I don't think anyone would, right? Like, so it's like people are putting in the hours, they're putting in the work. And yeah, it's not web free. Like it is, it's great to take away these barriers. And I'm having access to you through Rebels is amazing. I don't think I would have been able to meet you otherwise. And I'm thankful for that. But this is great. I think this is going to bring value to both. It has brought value to me today, and both to anyone who listens to this. I think you had a lot of great, insightful things to say. You broke down some things that maybe the average person like me doesn't understand when it came to the ERC 4337, and just kind of breaking down a bit what it means to own a project and what's involved. And yeah, I think that I just want to end on that note. Is it's not web free, right? Like it's like this is people's time, it's their work, it's their expertise, it's their skills. And we have to actually support people that are doing this work in this space, right? And like I said, even if it comes down to just supporting them by giving them the space to do what they're doing, right? I think constantly hounding people for updates or saying that this project's over or whatever because it's not something releasing every 5 minutes. That's not usually going to be an indicator of a great project either, because if you're releasing something every month, what you're releasing is probably not that high quality, right? Or bringing any value whatsoever, right? So I appreciate everything you've done. I appreciate you've always been open and supportive to us as the community. Even early on, when I was saying, hey, I want to start a sub community, and you were like, great, I'll support you. Like, let me know what it is, and I'll retweet it and I'll tell people about it. And like that's what the spirit of Web3 is, right? Is just how can we help each other, not how can we take advantage of each other and then get angry when things are
Exactly.
We're not having millions of dollars just showing up at our bank account overnight, right? So I think.
No, exactly. And I will, as you mentioned, I will be the first ones to help push essentially, anyone in the community starting something. There was an Angry Penguin, starting something at Latent Labs and trying to kind of like ideate around, like startup to start and business to start, right? And I've spent quite a bit of time with him. They were and pushing, like he was building, this AI kind of art competition platform, and so try to help as much as I can and just like organize and just like giving night cards ourselves, and just like NFTs to kind of incentivize people to help use his platform. There are like other people, as I mentioned, kind of like very happy to be on the podcast. I'm also helping however I can Wolf as well, who's also starting a podcast and kind of like a set of Twitter spaces, and like all those things are just wherever I can help, I will always do that, because like the goal is, the WAGMI kind of like thing is pretty much that. The idea is the goal is to just like help us push each other up kind of like all together. People like help me for a lot of things. I'm trying to help other people for a lot of things. And at the end of the day, we're in a space that is very small, that is about to kind of grow as we were saying, is kind of expansion, shrink, expansion, much bigger expansion, shrink, and so on, and rinse and repeat, which is, the vast majority of the industries have worked like this. And so I do believe that there is going to be a lot of value in just, bringing each other up, essentially, as part of this. So very excited. I'm seeing like, people releasing collections on, books that are based, mystery novel NFT, which is minting now. I'm very excited about it. So someone in the community has essentially just written amazing books that are available as NFTs, and he's doing like reading sessions fairly often. Super excited about that. You released things that I'm very excited for you to release any additional thing. Everyone owns essentially the brand at this point. Like I really want people to, if some people want to sell like clothes please go ahead. If you want to sell NFTs, please go ahead. If you want to like have photography that is like associated to it, please go ahead. AR art, podcast, anything. Very, very excited to push all these initiatives because, like, yeah, as you mentioned, it is the purpose of Web3.
Well, I think we'll wrap on that, and that was an awesome shout out to Dimensions Gate there, Ian. He's a Toronto boy. He's a couple hours away from me here, and actually, my samurai is the samurai in Five Deadly Rebels. So pretty hyped on that. But anyone listening, go check that collection. I'll probably throw the link in the bio. But he's doing amazing things and put a ton of work in. I was on his launch spaces there with Josh Ong from the Bake Council, and like hearing his passion for what he's doing and the work that he's poured into these books, it's really inspiring. And this is what we need to foster and support is people that are doing that. So thanks so much. Like I said, I always appreciate the support. You've been amazing since the beginning and the whole way through, taking time out of your day to do this, and we even spent time together setting up the mic setup and everything beforehand. So I appreciate you getting that all rigged up for me so that we can get the best experience for the listeners. And with that, I just want to say thanks so much, man. I hope you have a great day, and hope it's not too gloomy or snowy wherever you are.
No, it is actually a beautiful day. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it again, and I'm excited for the next one, hopefully.